Welcome to Sleepy Science, a place where science slows down, where understanding arrives gently, and where the universe tells its stories without urgency. If you enjoy calm science stories like this one, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps keep this space quiet and steady. Before we begin, we would love to ask you something simple. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now across different places and hours? We share the same gentle moment. Now allow your breathing to soften. Let your thoughts drift. And begin this quiet journey into how Earth found its place around the sun. Earth did not search for the right distance from the sun. It did not move with intention or awareness. Instead, it formed within a young solar system filled with motion, gravity, and gradual adjustment, where planets emerged, shifted, and settled through countless gentle interactions. In this story, we will follow how Earth formed from a swirling disk of dust and gas, how gravity shaped its orbit, how nearby planets influenced its path. This is not a story of precision by design, but of harmony through time. Before Earth had a stable orbit, before the idea of distance even mattered, the young solar system was a wide, restless field of motion, filled with dust, gas, and quiet gravitational currents that moved without urgency, shaping everything. Slowly, rather than deciding anything at once. There was no clear separation between paths, no fixed positions, only a vast rotating disk surrounding a newly formed sun that glowed softly within its own growing gravity. Within this disk, material did not rush inward or outward dramatically. Instead, particles drifted, collided gently, and gathered over long spans of time, guided by subtle differences in motion and attraction. Gravity acted not as a command, but as an invitation, drawing matter together gradually, allowing small clusters to become larger ones, and larger ones to begin clearing gentle paths through the surrounding haze. Distance, at this stage, was not measured or stable. Objects moved slightly inward, then outward. Paths overlapped. Orbits wavered softly. Nothing had found its place yet. As the sun continued to grow, its gravity deepened, shaping the movement of the disk without forcing it into rigidity. Regions closer to the sun grew warmer, while areas farther away remained cooler, creating gentle gradients rather than sharp boundaries. These gradients influenced how material behaved, what could remain solid, and what drifted as gas, quietly shaping where planets could begin to form. In one region of this disk, neither too close nor too far, matter began to gather with just enough stability to persist. Collisions were frequent, but soft. Growth happened slowly. Each encounter added mass without disrupting motion. Over time, this growing body began to influence its surroundings, carving a slightly clearer path as it moved, beginning the long process of becoming Earth. Imagine this early space as calm, rather than chaotic. Particles drifting like gentle waves, gravity acting like a steady pull rather than a forceful grip, time stretching wide enough for balance to emerge naturally. As you imagine this early solar system, allow your thoughts to drift just as slowly. Let the idea of distance feel undefined, fluid, not yet meaningful. Earth has not found the right place yet, because the idea of the right place has not formed. Everything is still learning how to move. This is where the story begins, not with precision, but with patience, where Earth's future orbit exists only as a possibility, shaped quietly by gravity, motion, and time that has no reason to hurry. As the young solar system continued its slow rotation, the wide disk of dust and gas began to reveal subtle pathways, not carved by intention, but traced patiently by gravity acting over long spans of time, because when motion repeats, gently enough, it begins to organize itself without effort. These pathways were not fixed roads or sharp lines, but soft corridors where material tended to drift, pause, and return again, learning the rhythm of the space it occupied. Within these corridors, countless small bodies moved together in loosely shared directions, their paths bending slightly with each pass around the sun, never identical, never perfectly circular, yet common enough to avoid chaos. Each orbit was a suggestion rather than a rule, allowing matter to explore nearby space without being flung away or pulled inward too quickly. This balance made room for growth. As clusters of material grew larger, their presence began to matter more. Their gravity, still gentle, subtly shaped the motion of nearby particles, encouraging some to linger and others to pass by. Over time, this created zones where accumulation became more likely, not because the location was chosen, but because conditions there allowed repetition without disruption. These were places where matter could return again and again, slowly building something lasting. Earth's earliest form began within one of these zones, not fixed in distance, but comfortably nested within a region where heat from the sun was neither overwhelming nor absent. Here, solid material could exist without evaporating, and gas could drift without escaping entirely. This quiet balance allowed growth to continue without forcing a decision about permanence too early. Distance during this phase remained flexible. Orbits widened slightly, then narrowed. Paths leaned inward, then outward. Nothing settled abruptly. Nearby forming planets also played a role, not through dramatic encounters, but through subtle gravitational conversations. Each growing body influenced the space around it, nudging others gently, reshaping corridors of motion without closing them. These interactions helped smooth extremes, preventing Earth's path from wandering too far inward toward heat or drifting outward into cold. Imagine these early orbits as slow, looping motions traced in dim light, where nothing collides violently and nothing escapes suddenly. The sun glows steadily at the center, not pulling harshly, but offering a constant presence that everything responds to in its own time. Space feels wide and forgiving. As you imagine this patient shaping of paths, allow your own thoughts to follow a similar motion. Let attention drift without locking onto a single point. Feel how calm grows when movement is allowed to repeat softly, without pressure to arrive anywhere yet. This stage of Earth's story shows that the right distance did not appear as a target to be reached, but as a range where motion could continue comfortably, where gravity guided without commanding, and where time had enough space to let. Balance emerged naturally, one gentle orbit at a time. As Earth's early form continued moving within its gentle orbital corridor, something subtle but important began to happen, because motion that repeats without disruption slowly transforms into balance. And balance, once established, has a once established, quiet way of holding things in place without force. Earth did not suddenly lock into a perfect path. Instead, its orbit began to feel familiar, returning again and again to a similar distance from the sun, not precisely the same, but close enough for stability to grow. Gravity played the central role in this holding, yet it acted patiently rather than decisively. The sun's pull drew Earth inward just enough to keep it bound, while Earth's forward motion carried it onward without letting it fall. These two influences did not compete. They cooperated, shaping a curved path that repeated softly, orbit after orbit, smoothing itself through time. Nearby planets continued their own quiet movements, and their gravity added gentle corrections. At times, Earth's path leaned slightly inward, feeling a bit more warmth. At other times, it drifted outward, experiencing cooler space. But these shifts were small, softened by the combined gravitational field of the growing solar system. Nothing allowed Earth to wander too far for too long. This is where the idea of the right distance truly began to form, not as a fixed measurement, but as a stable range where change remained gentle. Within this range, Sunlight arrived steadily enough to warm the surface without stripping material away. Energy flowed consistently, allowing Earth to continue forming without being reshaped entirely each orbit. The solar disk itself was slowly thinning now, its dust and gas being absorbed into planets or dispersed by sunlight. With fewer loose particles to disturb motion, orbits across the system became calmer. Paths that had once wavered began to settle. Earth's orbit smoothed, its shape becoming more regular, its distance from the sun less variable, not because it was chosen, but because it was reinforced by repetition. Imagine this moment as Earth moving through space with growing confidence, not aware, not deciding, but naturally returning to the same gentle curve again and again. The sun remains constant in the center, its light drifting outward evenly. Space feels quieter now, less crowded, more settled. As you imagine this slow stabilization, allow your own thoughts to settle as well. Let ideas return to the same calm center without effort. Feel how repetition creates comfort, how balance does not need to be enforced when it is allowed to form gradually. This stage shows that Earth did not find the right distance by searching or correcting, but by remaining within a range where gravity, motion, and time could work together without interruption. Balance held Earth softly, and in that holding, a stable orbit began to emerge, setting the stage for everything that would later depend on this quiet, dependable distance from the sun. As Earth continued to move along this increasingly familiar path, its relationship with the sun became a quiet negotiation rather than a struggle. Because gravity does not decide outcomes instantly, it adjusts them patiently, allowing motion to refine itself over time. Each orbit was not a repetition of the last, but a gentle correction, smoothing small irregularities and easing Earth closer to a rhythm that could last. The sun's gravity pulled steadily inward, offering a constant presence rather than a sudden command. At the same time, Earth's forward motion carried it onward, preventing collapse and maintaining distance. These two influences balanced one another continuously, not once, not perfectly, but enough to keep Earth returning again and again to roughly the same region of space. This balance did not freeze Earth in place. It allowed motion to continue calmly. Other planets quietly participated in this process. As they formed and grew, their gravity reached across space in soft, overlapping fields, nudging Earth's path almost imperceptibly. These interactions did not push Earth toward chaos. Instead, they dampened extremes, helping prevent dramatic shifts inward or outward. The solar system behaved less like a collection of independent bodies and more like a slow conversation, where each participant adjusted to the presence of the others. Over time, Earth's orbit became less sensitive to small disturbances. Early fluctuations in distance softened. Variations in speed evened out. The path around the sun grew smoother, not because all motion ceased, but because competing influences learned how to coexist. Stability emerged not from isolation, but from relationship. Distance now began to feel meaningful, not as a number, not as a target, but as a lived condition. Within this orbital balance, sunlight arrived with gentle consistency. The energy reaching Earth no longer swung wildly from one orbit to the next. Instead, warmth and light followed predictable patterns, allowing the planet to cool, condense, and organize its surface without being undone by extremes. The sun did not dominate Earth. It accompanied it. Imagine Earth at this stage, gliding through space. Its motion smooth enough to feel almost effortless, as if it were resting within the curve of its own path. The surrounding space feels quieter. Fewer particles drift aimlessly. The sun's light spreads evenly, a dim glow rather than a harsh glare. Everything feels settled, yet alive, with motion. As you imagine this calm negotiation unfolding, Allow your thoughts to mirror it. Let ideas approach and recede without tension. Feel how calm grows when forces balance naturally, without needing resolution or control. Earth's right distance was not chosen in a moment. It was negotiated gently, orbit by orbit, through gravity that adjusted rather than demanded. This stage marks the deepening of Earth's orbital identity, where distance from the Sun becomes something Earth carries naturally, supported by a balance that has learned how to hold motion softly, preparing the planet for the next quiet phase of its long cosmic story. As Earth continued circling the Sun within this quiet gravitational agreement, its path began to feel less like a line being traced and more like a living motion that expanded and softened gently with time, because even stable orbits are not rigid shapes. They are flexible patterns that allow small variations without losing their overall balance. Earth's distance from the Sun now moved within a narrow, comfortable range, breathing in and out slowly rather than shifting abruptly. This gentle flexibility mattered deeply. When Earth drifted slightly closer, increased warmth did not overwhelm the young planet, because the change unfolded gradually, allowing heat to spread, reflect, and dissipate rather than accumulate dangerously. When Earth moved slightly farther away, cooling arrived softly, never sudden enough to freeze motion entirely. These small variations did not threaten stability. They strengthened it, allowing Earth to adjust without breaking its rhythm. Gravity supported this breathing motion quietly. The Sun's pull remained steady, while Earth's momentum adapted smoothly, curving inward and outward in subtle arcs that repeated again and again. Each orbit refined the next, smoothing edges, reducing extremes, and reinforcing the range where balance felt natural. Over time, this range became familiar, not fixed, but dependable. Nearby planetary bodies continued their distant influence, offering soft corrections rather than disruptions. Their gravity acted like a stabilizing chorus, preventing Earth's orbit from stretching too far or tightening too sharply. This shared gravitational field created a kind of cosmic cushioning, where movement was absorbed and redistributed rather than amplified. Within this breathing orbit, sunlight reached Earth with increasing regularity. Energy arrived in patterns that could be anticipated by the planet's growing surface and atmosphere. Heat could linger without burning away material. Light could fade without plunging the world into deep cold. This predictability allowed Earth to continue cooling internally while remaining warm enough at the surface to hold gases, liquids, and slow chemical motion. Imagine Earth now gliding through space as if cradled within its orbit, moving gently closer, then softly farther, never straying far from comfort. The Sun remains present but not overpowering, its light spreading like dim light across a quiet horizon. Space feels calm, wide, and forgiving. As you imagine this breathing motion, allow your own awareness to follow it. Let attention drift inward, then outward, without effort. Feel how calm deepens when movement does not demand precision, when balance allows softness. Earth did not need a perfect distance. It needed a forgiving one. This stage shows that Earth's right distance from the Sun was not a narrow point to be reached, but a gentle zone to be inhabited, where gravity, motion, and time could breathe together, enough for the planet's deeper story to unfold. As Earth continued to move within this gentle, breathing orbit, stability slowly shifted from something that needed reinforcement into something that simply existed, because repetition, when uninterrupted for long enough, becomes habit. And habit allows systems to rest without losing form. Earth no longer needed constant correction to remain near its balanced distance from the Sun. The orbit had learned itself. Each revolution now followed a familiar curve, shaped by gravity that no longer surprised the planet. Small disturbances still occurred, but they were absorbed naturally, softened by the combined influences of the sun and neighboring planets. Instead of amplifying irregularities, the system quieted them, allowing Earth to return calmly to its established path. Balance no longer required effort. It was maintained through memory. This orbital habit mattered deeply for energy. Sunlight arrived with a steadiness that allowed Earth's surface and atmosphere to respond gradually rather than defensively. Heat could accumulate gently during long exposures and release softly during quieter intervals. There was no sudden stripping away of air, no runaway warming, no deep freeze that halted motion entirely. The distance Earth inhabited became a place where moderation felt natural. The young atmosphere benefited from this steadiness. Gases remained bound to the planet, not blown away by excessive heat or frozen into stillness. Chemical reactions unfolded slowly, given time to complete themselves. Water vapor could condense, linger, and return again, because temperature ranges no longer swung wildly from one orbit to the next. Stability gave processes time. Gravity continued its quiet work beneath all of this. The sun did not pull harder. Earth did not resist more strongly. Instead, both maintained their roles through continuity. Motion repeated. Distance held. Variation softened. Over immense spans of time, this repetition transformed balance into something durable enough to feel permanent. Imagine Earth now moving through space with no sense of urgency. Its orbit familiar enough to fade into the background of existence. The sun rises and sets in the sky of a young world still forming, but it does so with patience. Light spreads evenly. Darkness follows calmly. Space feels settled. As you imagine this habitual balance, allow your own thoughts to fall into a similar rhythm. Let ideas return gently to the same calm center. Feel how ease grows when nothing needs to be corrected constantly, when balance is trusted to hold. This stage marks a quiet but crucial moment in Earth's story, because the right distance from the sun no longer needed to be found or protected. It had become Earth's natural place, a steady orbit shaped by gravity, repetition, and time, stable enough to support everything that would slowly emerge upon the planet's surface. As Earth continued to circle the sun within this familiar and steady range, the presence of neighboring planets began to matter in a quieter, more refined way, because a system of many bodies does not settle through isolation, but through gentle mutual influence that smooths motion over time rather than disrupting it. Earth was not alone in learning its path. It was learning it together with the other forming worlds. The larger planets, especially those farther from the sun, acted like slow guardians of balance. Their immense gravity shaped the overall structure of the solar system, absorbing excess motion and redistributing it across wide regions of space. This did not pull Earth out of its orbit. Instead, it reduced long-term instability, preventing dramatic shifts that might have sent Earth drifting inward toward intense heat or outward into deep cold. Closer neighbors also played a role, though more subtly. As nearby planets moved along their own paths, their gravitational fields brushed past Earth's orbit like distant tides, introducing small variations that never grew large enough to threaten balance. These variations were softened by repetition. Each gentle nudge was followed by another that countered it, allowing Earth's orbit to remain centered within its comfortable range. This shared motion created a kind of quiet order. Orbits adjusted to one another slowly, avoiding crossings and collisions through gradual spacing and timing. Over time, the solar system became less crowded and more organized, not because bodies stopped moving, but because their movements learned how to coexist. Earth's distance from the sun became part of this larger harmony. Within this ordered environment, sunlight reached Earth with remarkable consistency. Energy input no longer depended on chaotic variation. Instead, It followed a rhythm shaped by stable paths and repeated motion. This consistency allowed Earth's surface to continue cooling internally, while remaining warm enough externally to support slow chemical and physical processes without interruption. Imagine this moment as Earth moving within a quiet cosmic neighborhood, where each planet keeps its distance respectfully, where gravity speaks softly rather than loudly, and where motion feels coordinated without being controlled. Space no longer feels crowded or restless. It feels spacious, balanced, and calm. As you imagine these neighboring worlds moving together, allow your own thoughts to settle into a similar sense of shared rhythm. Let ideas pass near one another without colliding. Feel how calm emerges when everything keeps enough space to move freely. This stage shows that Earth's right distance from the Sun was not maintained by Earth alone, but by the collective calm of the solar system itself, a gentle cooperation where many bodies move together in slow agreement, allowing Earth to remain exactly where it needed to be, not by force, but by harmony sustained quietly over time. As Earth continued to move within this calm network of shared gravity, something deeply important began to settle into the planet's experience. Because once an orbit becomes stable enough, light itself becomes predictable. Predictability is what allows a world to relax into long processes without fear of interruption. Sunlight no longer arrived in erratic surges or withdrew unexpectedly. It followed Earth gently, meeting the planet again and again at nearly the same distance, with the same quiet generosity. This consistency in light did not mean sameness. The Sun still offered subtle variations, soft changes that arrived slowly enough for Earth to respond rather than react. Warmth spread across the surface without overwhelming it. Cooling followed without stripping energy away too quickly. The balance between receiving and releasing heat became part of the planet's daily and yearly rhythm, guided by a distance that no longer wavered significantly. Within this steady light, Earth's surface learned how to hold energy. Rocks warmed and cooled gradually. Gases expanded and contracted without escaping. Water vapor could linger, condense, and return again, because temperatures remained within a forgiving range. Light was no longer a threat or a rare gift. It became a background presence, steady enough to fade into familiarity. Gravity continued its quiet guidance beneath this predictability. The Sun's pull held Earth gently, never tightening suddenly, never loosening enough to let it drift away. Earth's forward motion responded smoothly, maintaining a path that repeated with comfort rather than tension. The orbit did not demand correction. It allowed continuation. Studies of orbital dynamics suggest that once planets settle into such stable paths, their likelihood of dramatic change decreases greatly, not because forces disappear, but because balance reinforces itself. Small disturbances are absorbed by repetition. Motion smooths motion. Earth benefited from this self-calming structure early, remaining within its gentle zone of light long enough for deeper planetary processes to unfold. Imagine Earth now bathed in a soft, dim light that arrives each orbit with patience, never rushing, never retreating abruptly. The Sun glows steadily at the center. Space feels wide and quiet. The path between Earth and Sun feels familiar, like a distance that has been walked many times without strain. As you imagine this predictability settling into the planet, allow your own awareness to soften into repetition. Let thoughts drift and return without urgency. Feel how calm grows when light itself can be trusted, when nothing unexpected breaks the rhythm. This stage marks a quiet but essential transformation in Earth's story, because the right distance from the Sun is no longer something that must be maintained actively. It has become a gentle habit, allowing light, heat, and time to work together without interruption, creating the conditions for everything that would one day emerge upon this calm, steadily illuminated world. As Earth remained within this calm and predictable reach of the Sun, the planet began to experience something rare in the early solar system, because temperature itself learned restraint, and restraint is what allows a world to remain gentle rather than extreme. Heat no longer surged uncontrollably across the surface, and cold no longer arrived with sharp finality. Instead, warmth and cooling followed one another patiently, shaped by distance that stayed consistent enough to soften every transition. This restraint did not mean that Earth was uniformly warm or uniformly cool. It meant that changes unfolded slowly, allowing materials to respond without stress. Rock expanded gently under sunlight and contracted calmly when light faded. Gases thickened and thinned without escaping. Water vapor rose, drifted, and returned again, because temperature ranges remained forgiving enough to support repetition rather than disruption. The sun's energy, arriving from this steady distance, spread across Earth with balance. It warmed the surface without stripping it. It illuminated without overwhelming. Even during long exposures, heat dispersed gradually, carried by the planet's growing atmosphere and its slow rotation. Cooling followed just as gently, releasing energy without draining the surface of its ability to recover. This balance was not accidental. It was a direct result of Earth remaining neither too close nor too far, held within a range where the sun's influence could be absorbed, shared, and released in measured ways. Worlds that drift closer experience runaway heating. Worlds that wander farther lose energy too quickly. Earth, however, rested in between, where restraint became possible. Research into planetary formation suggests that this thermal moderation is one of the most fragile outcomes in a young solar system. Slight differences in distance can amplify over time, leading to extremes. Earth avoided this fate not by correction, but by stability established early enough to prevent divergence. Once temperature cycles became gentle, they reinforced the very conditions that kept them gentle. Imagine Earth during this phase as a planet wrapped in a soft envelope of warmth, where sunlight arrives like dim light across a quiet horizon, never harsh, never absent. Heat moves like gentle waves, spreading and fading without edges. Cold follows without shock, offering rest rather than erasure. The surface feels calm, supported, and unhurried. As you imagine this thermal balance settling into the planet, allow your own awareness to rest within it. Let intensity soften. Let thoughts cool and warm without pulling attention too far in either direction. Feel how deeper calm emerges when nothing pushes experience to extremes. This stage shows that finding the right distance from the sun was not only about gravity and motion, but about creating a space where temperature could behave gently, where energy could circulate without excess, and where Earth could remain calm enough to continue becoming itself, slowly, patiently, and without ever needing to rush. As Earth continued to move calmly within this restrained thermal range, its orbit itself began to function as a quiet form of protection, because distance that remains steady over long spans of time does more than define position. Shields a planet from extremes by limiting how much change can accumulate at once. The path Earth followed around the sun did not merely describe motion, it softened consequences. Each return along the same gentle curve meant that sunlight arrived with familiar strength, never suddenly increasing beyond what the surface could absorb, and never fading so deeply that recovery became difficult. This repetition created a kind of thermal memory within the planet. Rocks, gases, and early liquids adjusted to what they could expect, and expectation itself reduced stress. The orbit became a boundary that filtered energy rather than amplifying it. Gravity continued its steady guidance beneath this protection. The sun's pull held Earth close enough to remain warm, while Earth's forward motion prevented collapse. This balance did not change quickly, and that slowness mattered. Sudden shifts in distance are what create planetary crises. Earth avoided them by remaining within a groove carved patiently by countless gentle revolutions. Neighboring planets continued their distant influence, but now their effects were even more muted. The system had aged just enough for large instabilities to fade. Major rearrangements had already passed. What remained were small oscillations that never grew large enough to threaten Earth's position. The orbit behaved like a well-worn path, resilient to small disturbances because it had been traveled so many times before. Within this protected motion, Earth's atmosphere continued to gather and stabilize. Gases were no longer stripped away by excessive heat, nor frozen into immobility by deep cold. Instead, they circulated, layered, and interacted calmly, responding to sunlight that followed a dependable rhythm. Distance made room for chemistry to proceed slowly, allowing reactions to complete rather than being interrupted. Imagine Earth now as a planet moving within a gentle corridor of space where the sun's presence feels constant but not demanding. Light arrives, drifts across the surface, then fades softly. Darkness follows without finality. The orbit holds all of this quietly, ensuring that no single moment overwhelms the next. As you imagine this protective distance, allow your own thoughts to feel held as well. Let attention rest within boundaries that feel safe rather than confining. Feel how calm deepens when experience is guided gently, not pushed, not pulled too far in either direction. This stage marks an important realization in Earth's story, because the right distance from the sun did not merely allow life-supporting conditions to exist later. It actively protected the planet while it was still forming, filtering energy, smoothing change, and creating a calm environment where complexity could begin without being erased. The orbit became a quiet guardian, holding Earth steadily in place as time continued its slow, patient unfolding. As Earth continued to travel along its protective orbit, something subtle and deeply important began to settle across the planet, because when distance, light, and temperature remain calm for long enough, time itself begins to feel rhythmic rather than uncertain. The orbit no longer felt like a path that needed attention. It became a steady pulse, a quiet rhythm that repeated without surprise, allowing the planet to relax into duration rather than brace for change. Each passage around the sun followed the same broad pattern. Light arrived, lingered, and withdrew with patience. Warmth spread and faded without urgency. Cooling followed gently, never cutting too deeply, never arriving too late. These repetitions did not accumulate tension. They released it. Earth began to experience time not as a series of events, but as a continuous flow where each phase prepared the way for the next. This rhythm mattered profoundly for the planet's developing systems. Internal heat continued to escape slowly, guided by surface conditions that no longer shifted dramatically from one orbit to the next. The crust cooled gradually without cracking. The atmosphere adjusted its movements to predictable cycles of warming and cooling. Nothing needed to adapt suddenly. Everything had time. Gravitational balance supported this rhythm quietly. The sun did not vary its pull in ways that demanded correction. Earth did not change its speed abruptly. Instead, motion repeated smoothly, allowing the planet's orbit to become a metronome for all other processes. Distance from the sun set the tempo, and that tempo was slow enough to be kind. Research into orbital stability shows that once a planet remains within such a balanced range for long enough, its future becomes increasingly secure, not because forces disappear, but because stability reinforces itself. Small variations dampen rather than grow. The rhythm absorbs disruption. Earth benefited from this early, settling into a groove that would persist across vast spans of time. Imagine Earth now moving through space, as if carried by a gentle current, where each orbit feels like a familiar return, rather than a journey into uncertainty. The sun remains present, steady, offering dim light that spreads evenly across the surface. Space feels quiet. Motion feels dependable. As you imagine this rhythm settling into the planet, allow your own awareness to slow in response. Let thoughts align with repetition rather than urgency. Feel how calm deepens when time no longer feels fragmented, when moments connect softly instead of breaking apart. This stage reveals that finding the right distance from the sun was not only about where Earth was located, but about how time behaved there. The orbit created a rhythm gentle enough to support long processes, to carry change without shock, and to allow Earth to continue becoming itself within a flow that felt steady, forgiving, and endlessly repeatable. As Earth continued to move within this gentle, repeating rhythm, balance itself slowly faded from notice. Because when a condition remains stable for long enough, it no longer feels like something that must be maintained. It becomes the quiet background against which everything else unfolds. Earth no longer existed in a state of adjustment. It existed in a state of allowance, where motion, light, and distance cooperated without drawing attention to themselves. The orbit no longer announced its precision. It simply continued. Each return around the sun followed a path so familiar that even small variations dissolved into the larger pattern. Slight changes in speed, gentle shifts in position, subtle gravitational influences from elsewhere in the system, all blended into a motion that felt smooth rather than exact. The right distance was no longer something Earth occupied consciously. It was something Earth lived within. This invisibility of balance was essential. When distance no longer demanded correction, planetary systems could redirect their energy towards slow internal development. The crust cooled steadily. The interior released heat patiently. The atmosphere moved calmly, guided by predictable energy input rather than reactive extremes. Balance did not interrupt these processes. It supported them by staying out of the way. Light, arriving from the sun, no longer needed to be moderated constantly. The orbit had already done that work. Energy reached Earth within limits that allowed gradual absorption and gentle release. Surfaces warmed and cooled without stress. Gases circulated without escaping. The planet began to behave as though it trusted its position, responding to light as something expected rather than something to guard against. Astronomical models of planetary motion suggest that once a planet's orbit reaches this level of stability, it becomes increasingly resistant to dramatic change, not because it is locked in place, but because disturbances are spread thinly across time. Motion absorbs motion. Repetition smooths irregularity. Earth's distance from the sun entered this self-correcting calm early enough to protect the planet during its most delicate stages. Imagine Earth now moving through space without needing to hold itself together. Its path so gently reinforced by repetition that it feels effortless. The sun glows steadily ahead and behind. Space offers no sudden pulls, no sharp absences. Everything feels held within a quiet consistency. As you imagine this invisible balance surrounding the planet, allow your own awareness to rest within something similar. Let effort dissolve. Let attention settle without needing to focus tightly. Feel how deeper calm emerges when stability no longer asks to be noticed, when it simply supports you quietly from beneath. The stage shows that Earth did not merely find the right distance from the sun. It grew into it so completely that the balance disappeared into normality. And within that normality, time, matter, and motion found the space they needed to unfold gently, continuously, and without urgency, carried forward by an orbit that no longer needed to be perfect, only dependable. As Earth continued to travel through space within this calm, almost unnoticed balance, the orbit itself began to carry memory, because motion that repeats gently over vast stretches of time does not remain neutral. It becomes shaped by its own past, learning where it has been and returning there without effort. Earth's path around the sun was no longer just a present movement. It was a remembered one, Each completed orbit left behind a subtle trace in the gravitational relationships of the solar system. Not a mark that could be seen, but a tendency, a preference for returning to familiar curves rather than exploring new ones. The sun's pull and Earth's forward motion had repeated their conversation so many times that their exchange became smooth, predictable, and quietly reinforced by every successful return. This memory did not lock Earth into rigidity. It offered reassurance instead. Small variations still occurred, but they unfolded within boundaries shaped by long repetition. When Earth leaned slightly inward, gravity guided it back, outward gently. When it drifted outward, the sun's influence invited it closer again. These corrections did not feel like responses to danger. They felt like natural returns to something already known. Modern studies of orbital dynamics describe this behavior as long-term stability arising from repeated motion, rather than strict precision. Orbits that survive long enough tend to protect themselves, not through resistance but through familiarity. Earth's distance from the sun became familiar to the system, reinforced not by force, but by time spent returning to the same gentle range again and again. Within this remembered distance, sunlight continued to arrive with a calm consistency that allowed Earth's surface to deepen its own memory. Heat cycles repeated softly. Cooling followed without surprise. The planet began to anticipate nothing, because nothing unexpected arrived. Energy flowed in ways that could be absorbed, stored briefly, and released without urgency. Imagine Earth now moving as if guided by an invisible groove in space, not carved sharply, but smoothed patiently by countless passages. The sun remains steady at the center. Space feels wide and forgiving. The path feels known, even though no awareness exists to know it. Motion carries its own memory. As you imagine this remembered orbit, allow your own thoughts to rest in repetition rather than novelty. Let the mind drift back to familiar calm without needing stimulation. Feel how deeper calm grows when nothing demands exploration or correction, when returning becomes enough. This stage reveals that Earth did not only find the right distance from the sun once. It returned to it so many times that distance became part of the planet's ongoing story, held gently by gravity, motion, and time working together to remember balance, repeat it, and carry it forward without ever needing to decide again. As Earth continued to follow this remembered path around the sun, distance itself began to feel less like a condition that needed monitoring, and more like something that could be trusted, because trust emerges naturally when repetition never breaks, and the planet had now returned to the same gentle range so many times that nothing within the system expected disruption anymore. The orbit did not feel tentative. It felt settled. This trust changed how Earth interacted with energy. Sunlight no longer arrived as something that had to be endured or managed carefully. It was received calmly, spread slowly across the surface, and released again without urgency. The planet no longer behaved as though it might lose this balance at any moment. It behaved as though balance was simply how things worked here. Gravity supported this trust quietly. The sun did not need to adjust its pull. Earth did not need to alter its motion deliberately. Their interaction had matured into something stable enough to fade into the background. The forces were still present, still precise, but they no longer felt active. They felt reliable, repeating the same outcome without needing attention. This reliability mattered deeply for Earth's long future. A planet that trusts its distance can afford to change internally without fear. Heat can escape gradually. Materials can rearrange slowly. Atmospheres can form, thin, and thicken without being stripped away. Liquids can appear and persist. None of this would be possible if distance felt uncertain. Studies of planetary systems show that many worlds never reach this stage. Some drift too close and are reshaped by heat. Others wander too far and lose energy beyond recovery. Earth's quiet success was not dramatic. It was uneventful. and in cosmic terms, uneventful is a rare gift. Imagine Earth now moving through space with no sense of vigilance, its path so familiar that nothing prepares for emergency. The sun glows steadily ahead. Light spreads like a dim veil rather than a blaze. Space feels calm, not empty. Motion feels held. As you imagine this trust settling into the planet, allow your own awareness to do the same. Let the need to check or adjust fade. Let attention rest where it is. Feel how calm deepens when nothing needs to be controlled, when conditions are trusted to remain gentle. This stage marks a profound quiet achievement in Earth's story, because the right distance from the sun has now become something the planet relies on without thought. Balance has turned into trust, and trust allows everything else to unfold slowly, safely, and without interruption, carried forward by an orbit that no longer asks questions, only continues. As Earth continued to move within this trusted distance, the wider solar system around it also entered a calmer phase, because early restlessness gradually gave way to order, and order reduces noise, allowing individual worlds to remain undisturbed within their chosen rhythms. The space around Earth no longer felt crowded with drifting debris or unpredictable motion. It felt open, settled, and quietly supportive. In the earliest ages, countless small bodies had crossed paths, collided gently, or been drawn inward toward the sun. But as time passed, these loose materials either became part of planets or were carried away, thinning the environment through which Earth traveled. With fewer wandering objects nearby, Earth's orbit experienced less interference, fewer chances for sudden disruption, and more uninterrupted repetition of its familiar path. The sun itself entered a steadier phase, its output becoming more consistent over long spans of time. While subtle variations still occurred, they unfolded slowly enough to blend into Earth's established rhythm. Light did not surge unexpectedly. Energy did not vanish abruptly. The relationship between Earth and Sun matured into something calm and dependable, where both continued their roles without surprise. This quieting of the system mattered deeply. A stable distance can only remain stable if its surroundings allow it. Earth benefited from a neighborhood that no longer demanded constant adjustment, where gravitational conversations softened into background harmony. Motion continued everywhere, but it no longer competed. It cooperated. Within this calmer space, Earth's orbit felt increasingly insulated. The gentle curve it followed around the sun remained clear, unobstructed by sudden pulls or passing bodies. Each return felt familiar, reinforcing trust through repetition. Distance no longer shifted meaningfully. It held. Imagine Earth now moving through a solar system that has learned how to rest, where planets keep respectful distance from one another, where gravity whispers instead of calls, and where space feels wide enough to allow calm motion without interruption. The sun remains steady, offering light that drifts rather than presses. As you imagine this quiet neighborhood forming around Earth, allow your thoughts to settle into the same spacious calm. Let mental noise thin. Let attention expand gently without seeking detail. Feel how deeper calm arrives when the environment itself grows quiet enough to support rest. This stage shows that Earth's right distance from the sun was protected not only by its own orbit, but by the maturing calm of the entire solar system. As space around it grew quieter, Earth's position became easier to maintain, allowing balance to persist effortlessly, and giving the planet the uninterrupted time it needed to continue becoming a world where gentle processes could unfold without being disturbed. As the solar system continued to quiet around Earth, space itself began to feel less like a field of constant negotiation and more like a wide, patient allowance. Because when motion slows and paths settle, there is room for a planet to remain exactly where it is without being tested again and again. Earth no longer needed to defend its distance from the sun. The surrounding space had learned how to let that distance exist. With fewer large bodies crossing nearby paths, Earth's orbit experienced long stretches without meaningful disturbance. Gravity still flowed everywhere, but it did so smoothly, evenly, without sharp gradients that might pull the planet inward or outward. This evenness mattered. It meant that Earth could continue repeating its path without accumulating small changes that might grow over time. The orbit was no longer just stable. It was protected by calm. The sun's influence reached Earth across this quiet space with steady strength. Light traveled outward unobstructed, arriving gently, spreading across the planet without interference. There were no sudden shadows cast by passing debris, no abrupt shifts caused by nearby masses. Space itself became transparent to Earth's rhythm, allowing distance to function exactly as it had learned to do. This calm allowed Earth's internal systems to relax further. Without external disruptions forcing rapid adjustment, the planet could release heat, condense material, and build structures slowly and coherently. The surface did not need to respond defensively. The atmosphere did not need to brace against extremes. Everything could unfold at a pace that matched the planet's own internal timing. Modern simulations of planetary systems suggest that this phase is rare and fragile. Many young planets never experience such uninterrupted calm. Their orbits are disturbed before stability can settle deeply, pushing them toward extremes. Earth's experience of quiet space was not guaranteed. It arrived because balance had already been established early enough to persist while the system matured. Imagine Earth now moving through space that feels open and forgiving, where nothing reaches out suddenly, where gravity feels like a steady presence rather than a force. The sun glows softly ahead and behind. The path feels wide, familiar, and unchallenged. Distance holds without effort. As you imagine this allowance surrounding the planet, allow your own awareness to rest in the same way. Let go of the need to adjust. Let attention settle into stillness supported by space rather than constrained by it. Feel how calm deepens when nothing presses in, when there is room simply to remain. This stage marks another quiet layer in Earth's story, because finding the right distance from the sun was not only about arriving at balance, but about being allowed to stay there. Space learned how to accommodate Earth's orbit, and in that accommodation, the planet gained the uninterrupted continuity it needed to move forward gently, held within a calm that asked nothing more than time. As Earth continued to travel through this wide, accommodating space, something quietly remarkable took hold, because once a planet is allowed to remain without disturbance for long enough, remaining itself becomes the achievement. There is no longer a need for adjustment, correction, or protection. Earth's distance from the sun did not require attention. It required only continuation, and continuation arrived naturally, orbit after gentle orbit. This long period of remaining allowed Earth's systems to deepen rather than react. Heat leaving the interior did so slowly, finding paths shaped by time rather than urgency. The surface cooled in stages, each one completing itself before the next began. Nothing was forced to hurry. Nothing was pushed beyond its ability to respond. The orbit provided a steady framework where internal and external processes could align peacefully. The sun continued its steady presence, neither advancing nor retreating in influence. Light arrived, as expected, spread softly across the planet, and faded without finality. This regularity allowed Earth's developing surface to synchronize with its orbit, creating rhythms that extended beyond motion into structure. Cycles formed not because they were imposed, but because repetition allowed them to settle. Distance now functioned like a quiet boundary that did not confine, but reassured. Earth could warm without fear of overheating. It could cool without risking collapse. This balance did not eliminate variation. It softened it, ensuring that differences unfolded gently, and resolved themselves over time. Remaining within this range became a condition that supported patience. Imagine Earth at this stage as a planet resting within its path, not drifting, not bracing, simply continuing. Space feels vast and still. The sun glows calmly. The curve of the orbit feels familiar, like a path walked so many times that it no longer needs to be seen. Motion continues, yet it carries no tension. As you imagine this quiet endurance, allow your own thoughts to mirror it. Let ideas remain where they are without needing progress. Let awareness settle into the feeling that staying can be enough, that nothing must change for calm to exist. Feel how rest deepens when continuation replaces effort. This stage reveals a gentle truth about Earth's story, because the right distance from the sun was not maintained through constant balance checks or fragile precision. It was maintained by remaining long enough for balance to become ordinary. And in that ordinariness, Earth gained the space to become complex, layered, and alive, all supported by an orbit that asked nothing more than time to keep repeating itself quietly. As Earth continued to remain calmly within this trusted distance from the sun, the orbit stopped being just a path through space and began to shape the planet itself. Because when a world receives the same gentle energy again and again, it again does not merely endure it, it slowly reorganizes around it. Distance turned into influence, and influence unfolded quietly, without instruction or design. Sunlight arriving from this stable range interacted with Earth's surface in predictable ways, allowing patterns to deepen rather than reset. Heat reached the ground softly, spread across stone, and withdrew again without leaving scars. Over time, materials on the surface began to respond not to extremes, but to cycles. Rocks learned how to warm and cool without breaking. Gases learned how to circulate without escaping. Liquids learned how to appear, linger, and return. This steady energy input shaped Earth's internal timing as well. The release of heat from the planet's interior aligned with surface conditions that no longer fluctuated wildly. Cooling happened gradually, layer by layer, allowing structure to form instead of collapse. The orbit did not cause this directly, but it allowed it, creating an external calm that made internal patience possible. Researchers studying early planetary evolution often note that worlds receiving irregular energy inputs tend to remain geologically unstable for much longer, experiencing repeated resets that prevent long-term organization. Earth avoided this fate not by chance alone, but by staying within a distance where incoming energy remained consistent enough to support continuity. The orbit gave Earth time, and time allowed Earth to learn itself. Atmospheric behavior began to reflect this shaping influence. Gases warmed and cooled in rhythms that repeated gently. Pressure differences formed and resolved without violence. Circulation patterns emerged slowly, guided by energy that arrived reliably. The atmosphere did not need to shield the planet aggressively. The distance had already softened the sun's influence. Imagine Earth during this phase as a planet, quietly rearranging itself beneath a dim, steady light, where nothing rushes, nothing resists, and nothing breaks free. Space feels distant. The sun feels present, but gentle. The planet feels held within a calm exchange that repeats without variation large enough to disrupt. As you imagine this slow shaping taking place, allow your own awareness to drift and soften. Let thoughts settle into cycles rather than conclusions. Feel how deeper calm grows when conditions repeat kindly, when nothing needs to be protected from excess. This stage shows that Earth did not simply survive at the right distance from the sun. It grew into that distance, allowing the steady flow of energy to shape its timing, its structure, and its future gently. The orbit became part of the planet's identity, influencing not only where Earth was, but how it became what it is, slowly, patiently, and without ever needing to hurry. As Earth continued to exist calmly within this steady reach of the sun, something subtle yet powerful unfolded. Because a planet that remains within gentle conditions for long enough allows time itself to accumulate rather than pass unnoticed. And accumulation is what turns simple motion into history. The distance no longer merely moderated energy. It allowed moments to layer, one upon another, without being erased by extremes. With each orbit, Earth experienced nearly the same exchange of light and warmth. And because this exchange did not reset violently, the effects of one cycle were able to carry into the next. Heat absorbed during one passage did not vanish completely before the next arrived. Cooling followed without wiping the surface clean. Instead, change became additive rather than destructive. The planet began to remember. This accumulation mattered for structure. Materials on the surface responded to repeated, gentle conditions by organizing themselves more effectively. Crust thickened gradually. Boundaries became clearer. Internal differentiation progressed without interruption. The planet was no longer forming in fragments that disappeared. It was forming in layers that remained long enough to matter. The atmosphere benefited deeply from this continuity. Gases released from the interior were no longer lost as quickly as they appeared. They circulated, mixed, and settled into patterns that repeated softly. Pressure differences rose and fell without collapsing. Composition shifted slowly, guided by long exposure to consistent sunlight rather than sudden bursts or losses. Distance allowed chemistry to complete its conversations. Modern planetary studies suggest that this ability to accumulate time is rare. Worlds that experience fluctuating energy inputs often remain stuck in early stages of development, their progress undone repeatedly. Earth avoided this fate by remaining where energy arrived gently enough to allow continuity. The right distance did not accelerate evolution. It slowed disruption. Imagine Earth now as a planet where days, seasons, and cycles overlap rather than replace one another, where each moment leaves a faint imprint that is not immediately erased. Light drifts across the surface like gentle waves. Heat settles into stone. Cooling releases without urgency. Time feels wide, layered, and patient. As you imagine this accumulation of time, allow your own awareness to rest within it. Let thoughts layer instead of scatter. Let experiences remain long enough to soften. Feel how calm deepens when nothing is rushed away, when moments are allowed to linger quietly before giving way to the next. This stage reveals that Earth's success was not in finding the perfect distance once, but in staying within a forgiving distance long enough for time to build upon itself. The orbit offered continuity, and continuity allowed the planet to move beyond mere survival into slow becoming, supported by energy that arrived gently, predictably, and without demand, again and again and again. As Earth continued to remain within this forgiving distance from the sun, calm itself slowly became the planet's default condition. Because when energy arrives gently and predictably for long enough, systems stop preparing for disruption and begin operating from rest. The orbit no longer merely protected Earth from extremes. It allowed the planet to exist without constant correction, where equilibrium was not something achieved repeatedly, but something quietly maintained. In this state, Earth's internal processes found a steady pace. Heat from the interior rose and dispersed gradually, never building pressure too quickly, never releasing all at once. The crust adjusted in small increments, thickening and organizing without fracturing. What might once have been violent transformation became slow refinement, guided by the assurance that surface conditions would remain kind. The surface responded by settling into long, gentle patterns. Warming unfolded without urgency. Cooling followed without shock. Materials expanded and contracted calmly, learning the rhythm of sunlight that arrived neither too strong nor too weak. This rhythm did not demand attention. It carried the planet forward softly, allowing motion and stillness to coexist. The atmosphere reflected this calm deeply. Instead of reacting sharply to sudden energy changes, air began to circulate smoothly, redistributing warmth and releasing it in balanced ways. Pressure differences formed and resolved gently. Nothing rushed upward. Nothing collapsed downward. Distance had already softened the sun's influence enough that the atmosphere could behave with patience. Even space itself seemed to agree with this calm. The region around Earth remained free of major disturbances, allowing the orbit to repeat cleanly. Each return reinforced familiarity. Each repetition reduced the likelihood of deviation. Calm reinforced calm, creating a self-sustaining environment where stability required no effort. Imagine Earth now as a world moving through space without anticipation or defense. Its orbit so well suited that nothing within the planet needs to brace itself. Light arrives like dim light across a quiet horizon. Heat moves like gentle waves. Cooling follows like rest rather than loss. Everything feels held within a steady flow. As you imagine this calm becoming ordinary, allow your own awareness to follow. Let vigilance soften. Let the need to monitor fade. Feel how deeper calm arises when the environment itself is gentle enough to support rest without interruption. This stage shows that Earth's right distance from the sun did not only prevent disaster, created a condition where calm could persist long enough to become normal. And within that normality, the planet gained the freedom to evolve slowly, layering complexity without fear, guided by an orbit that no longer needed to be remarkable, only kind, steady, and endlessly repeatable. As Earth continued to move within this calm, forgiving distance from the sun, the idea of home slowly emerged, not as a place chosen or claimed, but as a condition that persisted long enough to feel reliable, because a planet does not need walls or borders to feel settled. It only needs circumstances that remain kind across vast stretches of time. The orbit no longer felt like a temporary arrangement. It felt like where Earth belonged. This sense of home came from consistency. Light returned again and again with familiar strength. Heat arrived softly and departed without haste. Cooling never erased what warmth had built. These repeating conditions allowed Earth systems to relax into long conversations rather than brief reactions. Nothing needed to prepare for sudden extremes. Nothing needed to recover from shock. The planet learned how to exist without urgency. Within this steady home, Earth's interior and surface found deeper coordination. Internal heat continued to rise, but it did so into an environment that could absorb and redistribute it gently. The crust adjusted slowly, forming layers that remained long enough to interact meaningfully. Change did not stop. It slowed into forms that could be carried forward rather than undone. The atmosphere, held close by gravity and protected by moderate warmth, settled into patterns that repeated softly. Gases mixed, circulated, and lingered. Energy moved upward and outward without stripping the planet of its envelope. Distance allowed the atmosphere to remain present, not clinging desperately, not escaping freely, but resting in balance. Researchers studying planetary climates often note that worlds rarely remain within such forgiving ranges for long. Slight deviations tend to grow, pushing planets toward extremes. Earth avoided this by entering stability early enough for repetition to reinforce itself. The distance from the sun became a place of return rather than a point of risk. Imagine Earth now as a world resting within a gentle field of light, where space feels welcoming rather than hostile, where the sun's presence feels steady rather than demanding. The orbit carries the planet quietly, offering continuity without confinement. Motion continues, yet it feels like rest. As you imagine this long home forming around Earth, allow your own awareness to soften into the idea of staying. Let thoughts settle rather than seek movement. Feel how calm deepens when nothing needs to change, when remaining is enough. This stage reveals that Earth's right distance from the Sun did more than allow life to become possible later. It created a lasting home for time itself, a place where processes could unfold slowly, where history could accumulate, and where the planet could continue becoming itself without being forced, guided gently by an orbit that offered patience, stability, and quiet belonging.